Midaku yapi lelo betuki lilo washtelo. Lakota imachi api tatanko huhaska, namila haska imachi api Rick Williams. Now the American Indian College Fund has been in Colorado now for about 10 years. We're a national organization and most of our focus is outside of the state, although we do have a presence with our national headquarters here and we interact with the community in many ways. Most of our opportunities and the resources that we provide go to tribal colleges that are located outside of the state. The biggest issues facing Native Americans today in Colorado are definitely the economic issues that face the average person in the state. We have high poverty rates and little resources to deal with the specific issues. We have issues with health care, not being able to access or have the resources for health care, especially when we leave the reservation and come into urban areas. We definitely have housing issues. And so we have the issues that face the general society on a day-to-day basis. And I think the other issue that we have is that when you look across the nation to places like Portland, the educational system in Portland has really gone the extra mile to help provide quality education and a charter school for Native Americans and are very successful. They're graduating about 88% of the students who are entering the educational systems in Portland. We don't have those kinds of facilities. We don't have those kinds of capabilities. And in a lot of ways, our kids get lost in the education systems throughout Colorado. The role of the American Indian College Fund, and we do provide services and support to students here in Colorado, is to create the financial resources so that a student will be able to go on to college. And we know that that's the most important thing that we can be doing to make changes in our communities. Providing an education is the answer. It solves many of the dilemmas in the economic issues, the quality of life, and so that's why I think the American Indian College Fund is a very important part of this community, but also on the national scale. Services that are lacking for the American Indians located in Colorado include a coordinated education effort that really ensures students have that opportunity to get through high school and then go on to higher education. We have issues with health care. We also have a lot of issues around our elders. There's no real elder program that's available exclusively for Indian people. They have to participate in other mainstream activities, and they're oftentimes spread out all over the city and the metro area, and really don't have an opportunity to take advantage of what few services there are available. I think that the other piece that is really lacking in our communities is that we don't have any economic development resources for our community. We don't have a lot of small businesses. We don't have a lot of resources that will help, that will allow our individuals and our community members to engage in mainstream economic development, and that's a real big need for our community here.
You want to talk a little about Indian country. It sounds like a James Bond movie or maybe a John Wayne movie or something to say Indian country, but it's actually a legal term. And Congress came up with something in 1948 called the Indian Country Law, and they describe what we think about on Indian reservations, different kinds of Indian or tribal lands, as Indian country. Indian country is a big part of the United States. And in fact, it occupies more than 3% of the total land base of the U.S. But in terms of energy resources, more than 12% of all the known fossil fuel resources in the United States are in Indian country. They're located on tribal lands. And tribal lands are typically lands that are held in trust by the federal government for the benefit of a given Indian tribe or an Indian nation. Well, Indian reservations go back, and Indian country, if you will, the concept goes back to before the United States was even a nation itself. But really in modern times, starting in 1948 especially, and then thereafter, there has been a real push to have people do business in Indian country. The Constitution of the U.S. talks about 3 different sources of sovereign power: the federal government, the states, and it also talks in Article 1 about Indian tribes. And Indian tribes are nations that predate the U.S. Constitution. There are groups of people that were running their own lives and doing very, very well before white contact. And in many cases, they've been through a lot of very difficult times, even terrorizing, terrifying times. And so what we have now is more than 500 federally recognized Indian tribes in the United States, including in Alaska. The bulk of them are in Alaska. But in the lower 48, we have a couple hundred Indian tribes that are federally recognized. What that means is that the federal government recognizes them as sovereign governments. They have powers just like municipalities would, or like state governments do. They can elect their own leaders, they make their own laws, they're governed by those laws. And so when you do business with a tribe or an Indian nation, you do business with that sovereign government. So one of the things that we do in this law firm is we often find ourselves in tribal court. We may represent companies that are involved in lawsuits in tribal court. Sometimes they are against the tribes. Sometimes we work with the tribes themselves and we'll go to tribal court or federal court. For instance, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm working with the Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation has got a reservation in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah that's bigger than the entire state of West Virginia. It's a huge place. And Navajo has a lawsuit that they've intervened in, a federal lawsuit that has to do with uranium cleanup for old uranium mills that polluted the reservation. And I work with the Navajo Nation and with a private company to support that lawsuit, and I'm actually in federal court representing them in that lawsuit. There are a lot of different tribes. There are more than 560 tribes that are federally recognized. And they're very different. Some of them have huge land bases, like the Navajo Nation, as I mentioned, it's bigger than the state of West Virginia. Some tribes are tiny. There are tribes in the state of Oklahoma that are no more than a few acres. There are tribes that have fewer than 100 members. I'm working right now with a few tribes in the state of Nevada, for example, that have tiny reservations and 100, 150 members at most. So there's a lot of variation between that end of the continuum versus, a tribe that's got a lot of land area, and like Navajo has 250,000 tribal members. There are also tribes that are huge, like the Cherokee Nation, the biggest in the country, has a very small land base, but it has a lot of members. And so there's a lot of variation between one tribe and another.
Well, I'm a Muskogee Creek, born in Oklahoma, but I was raised like a lot of Okies in California. Went to public schools and received my bachelor's from Brigham Young University in the 1960s, just about the time that Indian movements were starting to flourish and grow, and tribes began appearing on the people's consciousness and awareness. And so I came of age in a time of great excitement, great possibilities, and I am very grateful for that. In college, I became very involved with the other Indian students, and began learning more and more about all the tribes that populate the western United States, and that drew me to work for Indian tribes and on their behalf in my career. This census that just completed it will mirror the last 5 or 6 censuses, where the tribal populations are growing at a rate of about 3% a year. And for a 10-year period, that works out to 35% in a 10-year period. If Colorado grew that rapidly,
Yeah.
they would say we have a growth problem.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And because of that, tribal populations, the demographic, characteristics that most tribes have a very young population, not an aging population.
People are coming back to their reservations, and they need jobs that they're looking for those higher skilled, higher wage jobs to support their family, and sometimes those jobs aren't there. But
every tribe is unique. It's amazing. I think if you really looked at the diversity in Indian country versus the diversity in America, we're probably 80 or 90% of the cultural diversity in this country. And so we've developed among the tribes abilities to work together, across those cultural divides. And even tribes whose roots are the same, like Southern Ute, Mountain Ute being same nation, the Ute Nation, they themselves see each other and have different perspectives for the future. Mm-hmm. And so that even among tribes who are like Southern Ute, Mountain Ute, they're each unique to themselves. Tribal economies are actually growing faster than the non-tribal economies, not only in the rural West, but for America as a whole. And we're creating lots of jobs. There are more jobs now than ever before within tribal economies. But with our population growth being so fast, we're not keeping up with that. And that's the challenge that we're facing, is how do we accelerate, but at the same time, we don't want to become strip malls. We don't want to become, fragmented communities, suburbs. The other aspect that is hard to quantify in, studies and a gathering of data is how important it is that there is cultural cohesion within the tribe. That the tribe has a society that is at peace with itself and has a leader who has a vision that they're willing to follow.